In order to be successful in a HyFlex classroom, you do have to have a set of skills that may be slightly different than you may have had in your single mode class before, especially if it was primarily in the classroom. You do have to be able to be comfortable using the technology. And so you have to know the technology before you start, hopefully, how it works, what are some of the common troubleshooting tips and techniques you might need to do, what connections are simple to check and are not complicated to fix, what things have to be turned on, is there a sequence? And the most important thing perhaps is, who do you call? What's the number to call when you have that magic moment where something's just not working and it's really holding you up? In our campus, the first couple of weeks of class, we deploy our IT staff in the buildings so that they're a phone call away and they can be dispatched to a classroom within minutes, as opposed to 10 or 15 minutes coming from a central location. That really helps. And so as a faculty member, I have to know that there's help for me technically if I need it. Some of our classes, if I'm a faculty member with a large class, I might specifically have a TA, and that TA is going to have technology skills too. So the technology is important. You cannot get around that. All right. And to the extent that it becomes problematic, it just gets in the way of the teaching, and then it really starts disrupting the overall learning experience. So we want to make sure we've got faculty who are prepared technology-wise. Another aspect, I think, is faculty who are prepared to teach well asynchronously online, because a lot of students will probably end up choosing that mode, or they may. And if you've never taught fully online, or you've never taught fully online well, you don't think you've been that effective, it's important to get preparation to do that. Because your students are going to expect you to know what to do teaching online, and your interaction, your engagement, as well as the well-designed and highly structured online environment are things that they're going to rely on for learning, and you can learn how to do that. I guess the third thing I'd say is that I think you have to have the patience with yourself and with your students to learn how to use the technology, to learn how to coordinate things, especially in the synchronous session, because every interaction is going to have, at least initially, it's going to add some time, right? There's going to be translation or transaction time, or transition time from a classroom focus to an online synchronous focus and back. And so you have to be able to accept that that's part of the nature, and then that just kind of gets built into the way you're teaching your course. HyFlex teaching, can be considered a different genre, as some others have called it, of teaching. And so just like you learned how to teach well in the classroom, or you learned how to teach well asynchronously online, or even over the last year and a half or so, learned how to teach well synchronously online, HyFlex teaching is another learning process for you to go through.
What is important to be successful in the HyFlex environment is, I think, flexibility, also being a resilient person. So not, you need to be aware that you cannot control everything. You're like teaching in a more technological environment, and some things can happen that you were not prepared for. So you can prepare in advance different scenarios that can happen, and you can think about how will I deal with certain situations. But I think this is being a flexible person and preparing for possible scenarios is important. And also being aware that you don't need to solve everything yourself. So ask assistance from your students, and this is, I think, important. So it's much more. It's not one direction, it's really in two direction situations. So being prepared for that is very important to be successful, I think.
You really need to learn how to use and troubleshoot the equipment. And that includes your learning management system. Your learning management system is going to play a big role in a HyFlex course. Practice your Zoom facilitation. Don't forget about or ignore the online students. Again, master your LMS so that the online experience is seamless for students regardless of their participation mode.
I think there's many different answers to this, but the most obvious one is that there's a lot of technology that's being mediated as you're working in the classroom, online, offline, all at the same time. So maybe spend a little bit of time learning how to use the technology. When I first started teaching, first I was using Microsoft product, and then I switched over to Zoom. You just have to be aware, like every little once in a while, I'll check the screen or try to mix things up in a creative way. So for example, in some of my coding classes, I'll ask a student to lead the class. Like in other words, they'll be coding and showing an example, and then I'll be running around to everybody's workstations to answer any problems or answer any questions if we're in a lab. If we're in a lecture, then I'll be, talking. When I pause to say, does anybody have any questions? I'll look around the room, but I'll also look at the screen to see if anybody has any questions. And I'll encourage, like make a Dropbox or something like that in the learning management system for a student to send in any questions they have as well. So even if they're asynchronous, I'll incorporate that into the next class, into the next lecture, or just email them back. But I want those answers to be as reusable as possible. So for example, if I'm fixing somebody's problem and everybody has the same problem, they could see it in one place and the problem doesn't have to be replicated 20 times. It makes it a lot more efficient, and it really helps students move forward, right, as they see the solution being solved.
I think first it starts with design to be successful. When we at the very beginning, the design and the building of the course to be easily navigable, where the class is it has an easy flow. So I would start with build. I would start building toward learning objectives. I believe that they need to learn about backwards design, that they're actually going toward those learning objectives. I do believe that they do need to understand the flip model in general as they're going into this classroom, so they don't just lecture inside the classroom, record it, and throw it inside the online environment. Or just because lecture, if it's happening inside the classroom, and there's no interaction whatsoever, that could be just simulcast, like it's on a television screen, or just like you watch it, I watch it, nobody's engaging, and then maybe they're taking notes or something. Both of them said are taking notes. So understanding the flip model, building with the backwards design model and the flip model, I think is key. And then making it very easy for students to be able to go through, sets it up so that you can do what you need to do once you're inside that classroom. And if a professor is sick, or a professor is out of town, or if a student is sick or out of town, or family obligations or things like that, if that design will set professors up for success. Also, for that technology, they need to be confident with the technology in the classroom and be practiced on the technology, and practice it in small increments, little by little, not all at once, so they don't become overwhelmed and say, oh, it's the fault of HyFlex is the problem. HyFlex is, in the majority of cases, is not the problem. It's either non-support of technology or non-skill, or you haven't practiced, or you don't have confidence in that particular area, or you're just resorting to that same lecture-based kind of model.
So as I mentioned before, I think one of the most important skills that faculty should have in a HyFlex learning environment is adaptability. And, that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the planning at the very beginning of the course, but I think it has everything to do with the opportunity to see how things are going in the course and to be able to adapt to it. Now, that could be in real time. So as we said, in a classroom, when you're in HyFlex, again, you're relying on technology a lot to allow those synchronous learners to connect to the classroom. We're trying new techniques to provide an opportunity to work on group work or to work throughout the classroom with synchronous online and in-class learners. But I think that having the adaptability to understand how to either change things up, maybe, make that change on the fly, work through any technical issues that might be occurring is a really important piece. And I think that also comes with versatility. So thinking creatively about the way that you're designing the class and designing the course content becomes an important part in trying to think about, creating material that's going to be adapted to all the learners that are involved in that HyFlex learning environment. So I would say adaptability, versatility, creativity is also a key piece as well when we think about, approaching that HyFlex classroom. And at the very end of it, and we talked about this earlier as well, being reflective, right? So looking at what worked and what didn't work, engaging in that reflective practice allows you as an instructor to continue to adapt and build as you move through multiple deliveries of that course.
The types of skills that I would recommend that faculty acquire to be successful in the HyFlex classroom would be technological skills, becoming very comfortable with what might feel uncomfortable at first. There are a lot of different apps out there, and I think part of it is having an open mind and experimenting and finding out, okay, what works best for me? What am I most comfortable with? And what are my students responding the best to? So in regards to technology, it can even be things that are embedded within Zoom. So with Zoom, you can create polls. There's also annotation that you can do. And if we're familiar with doing these types of things in a classroom setting, it can feel foreign and easy to just overlook in an online setting. So this is something that having that ability and that willingness to learn, I think that really comes into play. Because again, with tech skills, it's going to make things much easier for you. And really being honest and open with the students if it is new for you, rather than trying to approach it as though you're an expert, approach it with a beginner's mindset, approach it in that you're all learning together, that you're also very much open to their feedback and ideas. And then I think that helps to take some of the pressure off. And I think at the beginning, a lot of faculty might, I know I was very nervous with this, is the thought of being recorded can be very intimidating. And this is also something you can be very upfront about. And in my experience, it really does get better with time. And one of the tips that I found really helpful is getting comfortable with pausing the recording during times where students might be thinking about how to respond, or while I might be opening up a particular document. You just have to make sure you remember to resume the recording. But if you are able to get into the habit of pausing and then unpausing, this can help save you from editing time that can be quite time consuming.